The camera lights were harsh, white, and hot. The U.S. Capitol hearing room was packed. Congress members in suits, aides moving with quiet urgency, reporters scribbling their pens, the only sound before the storm. The hearing was supposed to be about numbers, budgets, school funding, policy updates. But something else was building, and everyone felt it. The eyes of the country were watching. It was an education reform subcommittee hearing, meant to address why so many inner-city schools were crumbling, why classrooms still had no heat, why textbooks were from the 1990s, why graduation rates were collapsing like worn-out bridges. But deep inside the hearing, there was a colder truth. Billions in funding were missing. The room felt like a courtroom now, not just a debate hall. Caroline Leavitt sat with perfect posture at the end of the witness table. 27 years old, blonde, confident, and underestimated by almost everyone in the room. Dressed in a crisp, pink blazer, hair tied back in a ponytail so sharp it could slice glass. She looked like someone ready for cable news until you met her eyes. They were alert, precise, dangerous. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, fire in her voice and steel in her spine. A congresswoman known for emotion-driven speeches, biting truths, and the way she made every camera lean closer. Today, she wasn't here to just ask questions. She was here to expose, to shame, and maybe to destroy. The hearing started slow. Officials mumbled statements, threw around vague numbers. But it was all background noise. Then came the moment Crockett leaned into her mic. Her voice, smooth and loud, filled the room. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured on real world suffering by a Barbie with a podium." The words dropped like a bomb. Dot silence, dot gasps, dot a reporter's pen actually slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Caroline didn't blink. She didn't move. Only her right hand gripping a bottle of water tightened. One of her aides leaned forward, clearly alarmed, but Caroline gently waved her off. Then she did something no one expected. She smiled just slightly. The kind of smile you see before the trap closes. The room, already tense, grew tighter. It was suddenly not just about education anymore. It was about pride, insult, control, and something more ancient. Dominance. Crockett didn't repeat her words. She didn't need to. The cameras had already captured it. News outlets were breaking into coverage live. Twitter was exploding. Caroline leaned forward slightly, adjusted her microphone, but said nothing. Her silence said everything. This was not weakness. This was calculation. Her eyes scanned the room like a chess player. She was not going to swing wildly. She was going to wait. Then strike. The chair of the subcommittee banged the gavel, trying to move things along, pretending the room hadn't just shifted its entire mood. "Let's stay professional, please." Crockett didn't flinch. She wanted the world to see the line she had just drawn. A progressive warrior facing off against what she viewed as the face of conservative polish and pretense. But Caroline was not shaken. Behind her calm, her mind was working. She had heard insults before, in campaign ads, on podcasts, in the streets. But none like this. This one was personal, but also public. She knew she couldn't answer it with emotion. She had to answer it with facts. Surgical, devastating, undeniable. Dot, as the next witness began speaking, Caroline slowly opened the folder in front of her. Inside were not just talking points, but records, documents, leaked reports, whistleblower notes. The room had seen her close and her smile and assumed she was soft. They forgot what she really carried. The rest of the room tried to return to normal, but it couldn't. The tension was a living thing now. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer. Everyone was waiting. When would Caroline respond? But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet. Crockett, watching from her side of the table, was already preparing for round two. Her aides handed her papers. Her fingers drummed on the table. Her eyes, sharp as ever, never left Caroline. Caroline flipped one more page in her folder and quietly underlined a line in red. A line that named a nonprofit. A nonprofit connected to government contracts. A nonprofit linked to Jasmine Crockett's longtime campaign donor. The comeback was already in motion. It wouldn't be loud. It would be cold, precise, and impossible to dodge. The cameras kept rolling. The hearing moved forward. But the country was no longer focused on education. They were watching two women, one fueled by fire, the other armed with ice head toward. A collision that would not just shake the room, but echo across America. And it all started with one phrase: Barbie at the podium. The hearing room's mood had shifted entirely. What began as a dry policy discussion was now pulsing with electricity. Reporters weren't just scribbling anymore. They were recording, texting editors, whispering to each other. The networks had gone into breaking news mode. Headlines flashed across screens. Congresswoman Crockett calls Leavitt Barbie at the podium during heated hearing. Caroline Leavitt didn't speak. Not yet. She let the silence do its job, and it did. Even Crockett seemed to notice the shift. Her fiery eyes scanned Caroline's face, searching for any sign of hurt, embarrassment, weakness. But all she saw was something unsettling: patience, control. Caroline finally adjusted the microphone. "Madam Chair," she said softly, "may I respond to that comment before I move forward?" The chair hesitated. You could see the political calculation happening behind her eyes. Granting that request meant allowing a public clash. Denying it would make the insult look like an accepted truth. "You may proceed," the chair said. Caroline didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I came here today to talk about how billions in taxpayer money have vanished while children in places like St. Louis, Detroit, and the South Bronx sit in broken classrooms. I did not come here to be mocked for my appearance. I'm not here as a dolly mere, as a representative of the American public." A few heads in the room turned. Even some on Crockett's side of the aisle straightened up. Caroline continued, her voice like ice, measured and dangerous. "And while Congresswoman Crockett may feel entitled to degrade me on national television, I ask the American people to look beyond sound bites and insults. Because behind her words are numbers, millions of missing dollars. And behind those numbers are children forgotten." Crockett scoffed. "Spare me the theatrics. This isn't a beauty pageant. It's Congress." Caroline looked directly at her, not blinking. "Then why did you reduce a policy hearing to a playground insult?" The room froze again. That was the moment. The clash had truly begun. Crockett leaned forward, anger sharpening her voice. "You talk about numbers like they're people. You defend budgets like they're kids. You're so buried in spreadsheets. You forgot what a classroom smells like after the roof leaks for weeks." But Caroline was ready. She opened her folder and calmly slid a document across the table toward the chair. "This," she said, "is a full audit of the Education Equity Fund. One of the nonprofits repeatedly praised by Congresswoman Crockett in her past speeches. According to the audit, 41% of its allocated funding never reached the districts it claimed to support." Whispers filled the room like smoke. Crockett's hand froze over her notes. Her eyes darted toward the document. She hadn't expected a counterattack so fast, so surgical. Caroline didn't stop. "And here," she said, sliding another paper forward, "is a donor list from that same nonprofit. One of its top funders is also a campaign contributor, too." Several committee members, the chair's brow furrowed. Reporters leaned in so far it looked like they might fall from their seats. Crockett's aides whispered frantically in her ear. Her jaw clenched. Caroline continued, her voice quiet but firm. "I was called a Barbie, but I've brought receipts." Crockett erupted. "You want to talk about donations? Look at your party, corporations, buy your talking points by the crate." "All right." But her voice was shaking, now frustration mixed with panic. The control was slipping. Caroline didn't raise her voice once. "I'm not defending corruption on either side. I'm exposing what's happening right now, in this room, under this committee's watch." Suddenly, the chair banged the gavel. "Order, enough. This is not a campaign rally." But the damage had been done. Crockett looked visibly shaken, her team fumbling through papers trying to find a defense. Caroline leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed now. She had turned the insult into a weapon. She hadn't just responded, she had flipped the table. News alerts lit up across phones in the room. Caroline Leavitt dismantles Crockett's accusation with financial documents. From Barbie to Bombshell, Leavitt strikes back. The panel looked different now. Crockett was still standing tall, but she was backpedaling. Caroline had walked into the hearing, underestimated Dan. Now, she was redefining it. Outside the Capitol public, reaction was already boiling. Clips were being clipped, shared, stitched into reactions across TikTok, X, and YouTube. Voters weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. Inside the room, there was no going back. What had started with an insult had now become a political firestorm, and both women were locked in a public battle with everything at stake. The hearing resumed, but the calm was an illusion. The air inside the chamber felt heavy, like the stillness before a storm surge. Cameras stayed locked on both women. What once seemed like a policy debate had evolved into something far deeper: an ideological war wrapped in personal pride, political stakes, and national attention. Caroline Leavitt kept her posture composed. Her fingers slowly tapped the folder she had brought, each motion-controlled, precise. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett whispered furiously with one of her aides, eyes darting between documents and the now viral moment playing out in real time. A second aide leaned in and whispered, "Trending worldwide. Hashtag Barbie with receipts." Crockett leaned back and took a breath. "So that's your game," she said sharply. "You think waiving audits makes you qualified to decide what real education looks like?" Caroline didn't flinch. "I think billions lost in mismanaged funding is something the American people deserve to hear about, especially when that funding was promised to their children." The committee chair tried to move the discussion forward. "Let's return to the topic of charter school expansions and their role in equity." Crockett cut in. "Equity." She turned her focus to the room. "Do you know what equity looks like? It's walking into a school in Houston and seeing desks with missing legs. It's a teacher buying her own supplies. It's not some sanitized pie chart from a color-coded spreadsheet." Several lawmakers nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. Others leaned forward. But Caroline didn't let her lose the moment. "I've walked into those schools too," she replied calmly. "And I asked what happened to the funding they were promised. You know what they told me? No one could trace where the money went. No accountability, no oversight, just speeches and slogans." Reporters in the room began typing again with urgency. The hearing was no longer about just education, it was about trust. Caroline reached into her folder again, pulling out a second batch of documents. These are internal emails between district officials and a private firm contracted by the Equity Fund. The firm overbilled the Department of Education by nearly $12 million. No services delivered, no audits triggered. Gasps rippled across the room. Crockett leaned forward, furious. "That document hasn't been authenticated. You can't just throw out claims on national TV like it's a gossip column." "I agree," Caroline said, not missing a beat. "Which is why I sent it to the Inspector General's office 3 days ago. Their preliminary review confirmed the discrepancy." Silence. One congressman to Caroline's left murmured, "You came ready for war." But Crockett wasn't finished. Her pride wouldn't allow her to retreat. She looked directly at Caroline. "You may be smart, Miss Leavitt. I won't take that from you. But intelligence without compassion is just cruelty in a suit." It was a strong line, and the room felt it. Caroline paused before responding. "And compassion without discipline becomes chaos." The chair banged the gavel again, but the authority behind it was fading. This hearing was now out of control and America loved it. On social media, influencers, politicians, and educators weighed in. Some praised Crockett for her passion, her roots, her emotional intelligence. Others hailed Caroline as the woman who walked into a trap and rewired it. Into a spotlight. Outside the hearing room, crowds were gathering. Protesters from both ends of the spectrum stood behind barricades. Some waved signs reading, "Defend our schools." Others held posters that read, "Funding, not fantasies." The White House. Press office issued a statement within the hour. "We fully support Caroline Leavitt's efforts to bring transparency to education funding. While we respect the debate in Congress, personal attacks should never replace public responsibility." Back in the room, Caroline shifted the narrative once more. "I'm not here to be liked," she said softly. "And I'm not here to be insulted. I'm here because kids in Baltimore still don't have heat in winter. I'm here because the money meant to fix that disappeared and no one asked where it went." This time, no one interrupted her. "I'm here," she said finally. "Guess someone needs to ask the uncomfortable questions without being dismissed as a Barbie." That line landed like thunder. Crockett's fire was still there, but it was quieter, now less certain. She knew the story was shifting, the headlines forming without her permission. Caroline glanced at the cameras once, just once, and then turned back to the chair. "If we're done with the name-calling, I'd like to present my final findings." The chair didn't object. No one did. The hearing had become more than a clash. It was now a reckoning. And it had just begun. The hearing room had transformed. It no longer felt like a government proceeding. It felt like the edge of something bigger. The tension wasn't just between two women. It had spilled into the public, onto social media, into evening newsrooms. America was watching, waiting, and choosing sides. Caroline Leavitt flipped to her final page of documents. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Like someone who knew every camera angle and every silence could either build her case or destroy it. "Before I continue," she said, her voice even, "I want to clarify something." Everyone looked up. The phrase "Barbie at the podium," that wasn't just about me, was meant for every young woman in politics who doesn't dress or speak the way people expect. It was a warning shot. But I'm not here to flinch. I'm here to speak. Gasps and murmurs broke out again. Crockett narrowed her eyes, saying nothing. But her hand tightened around her pen. "I've spent the last 6 months gathering data from districts across the country," Caroline continued, "where there were failed reading programs, outdated textbooks, and classrooms with no working air conditioning. What I found wasn't just incompetence, it was corruption." She held up another paper. The Equity Advancement Fund praised. By this very subcommittee funneled $72 million to a shell company based in Delaware. No employees, no deliverables. Yet their contract was renewed 3 times. The silence was deafening. "Page 14, she said, shows the bank transfers. They match political contributions made weeks later. And yes, I've shared these with the Department of Justice." A few lawmakers shifted uncomfortably. Some were visibly angry, but not at her. They looked betrayed. Crockett finally responded, "So your plan is to suggest everyone here is complicit?" Caroline looked at her and replied, "No. But if you're not asking these questions, then who is?" A voice from the back of the room spoke up. It was Congressman Weaver, a senior member with a reputation for neutrality. "Are you suggesting this subcommittee has been manipulated?" Caroline didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting the numbers don't lie." But silence does. The weight of her words settled like fog across the chamber. A pause. Then Crockett stood up. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she walked slowly to the edge of the table and looked at Caroline from across the room. "You want the truth?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "I've seen those broken schools. I've walked into mold-infested buildings and cried with single mothers who can't afford new shoes for their kids. I've been there. Not with a film crew, not with a camera. It's just me. And maybe I didn't read the audit trail. Maybe I was too focused on the crying kids to check the fine print. Her words hit hard, but don't you dare imply that passion is the enemy of truth. Because without heart, numbers are nothing but ink. The room broke into light applause. Not for show. It was emotional, spontaneous. For a moment, it seemed Crockett had reclaimed the narrative. But Caroline wasn't done. She stood too. And for the first time, her voice wasn't calm. It cracked slightly, gnawed with weakness, but with emotion she had held back until now. "Do you think I don't know what those classrooms feel like?" she said, her voice sharp with feeling. "I'm not here because I was bored. I'm here because my brother dropped out at 15 because I watched my mother fight to teach. English in a broken school with no chalk, no paper, no backup." Silence. "People think I'm here for power or PR. But I'm here because I lived through it, and I promised myself I'd find out why the money never helped." Another ripple moved through the chamber. Not applause this time, respect. A quiet kind of respect. Outside the room, protests turned into vigils. Educators held signs that read, "We remember the missing millions." Parents stood beside photos of their children holding worn-out textbooks. The narrative was no longer red versus blue. It was real people versus the machine. And Caroline had tapped into that fire. Reporters scrambled to update their headlines. Producers whispered into earpieces. And one camera operator, barely audible, said to his assistant, "This is the moment. The one that'll be replayed for years." Back inside, the committee chair cleared his throat. "Ladies, we need to recess for 15 minutes. But everyone knew that wasn't the end, because when they returned, the truth wasn't just going to be spoken, it was going to be unleashed. The hearing resumed with a new kind of silence. Not the empty quiet of order, but the heavy pause before something explodes. Reporters stood. Cameras refocused. No one looked away, not even for a second. Jasmine Crockett returned to her seat, with her jaw set like stone. Caroline Leavitt remained perfectly still, hands folded in front of her, but her eyes scanned the room with laser precision. Every angle, every movement, every whisper mattered now. The committee chair leaned into the microphone. "Congresswoman Crockett, Miss Leavitt, we expect this session to proceed with respect and substance." Neither responded. The air between them was electric. Crockett was first to speak. "So now we have conspiracies. That's what this has become." Caroline raised one brow, not in arrogance but in control. "No, Congresswoman, not conspiracies, just numbers. And if the numbers make people uncomfortable, maybe it's time to ask why." Crockett leaned forward. "You parade those spreadsheets as if they carry more weight than lived experience. You think because you found a funding error, you get to question our entire system." "I don't have to question it," Caroline said, calmly opening a folder. "The public already is." She pulled out photos-color printouts of classrooms from Detroit, Newark, and South Chicago. Mold on ceilings, torn chairs, broken windows, kids sitting on the floor. "These were taken in the last 4 weeks," she said, sliding them across the table. Crockett stared at them, eyes flickering. Her voice faltered. "We've been fighting for those kids for decades, and yet," Caroline cut in, "we have billions spent and nothing to show for it." The interruption sparked audible gasps. One congressman muttered under his breath, "She's going too far." But Caroline kept going. Her tone remained level, but her words carried iron. "Where is the accountability? Who signs the checks? Who tracks where they land?" She pulled up a digital chart on the screen. Bar graphs, audit trails, funding lines that vanished mid-chain. She clicked through them with chilling efficiency. Then she stopped. One name appeared, a foundation, linked quietly to 3 members of the subcommittee. The room froze. "You're implying corruption?" a congresswoman barked. Caroline didn't flinch. "I'm not implying. I'm showing you where the money went." Jasmine Crockett stood up again. this time clearly rattled. "This isn't investigative journalism, Miss Leavitt. This is political theater." Caroline stood with her, matching her height, her presence. "Then explain it right now. Explain how $11 million meant for special needs programs was rerouted." To a consulting firm with zero educational background, the panel chair slammed the gavel. "Miss Leavitt, you are not authorized to respectfully," Caroline said, her voice suddenly rising. "I am authorized to speak for every family whose children have been lied to, whose futures were stolen while this body shuffled papers." The room broke, not into applause, but into chaos. Cameras zoomed in. One protester outside the glass door screamed, "Yes!" "Say it again?" The chair demanded order, but the momentum had already shifted. The public was watching a new political force rise in real time. Jasmine Crockett, trying to gain back control, raised her voice. "You want to play hero, but you're just another product of a system that rewards noise over substance." Caroline didn't blink. "You called me Barbie with a podium," she said, voice sharp but steady. "You wanted me to be small, cute, quiet. You thought I'd fold under pressure?" Her gaze pierced through the panel like a blade. "I don't break that easily." Social media was now on fire. Hashtags like hashtag Barbie with facts and hashtag Leavitt vs. Crockett were trending. Newsrooms scrambled to edit packages for the evening broadcast. Outside the Capitol, crowds grew. Not just protesters, now teachers, students, and veterans, all standing shoulder to shoulder, holding signs demanding truth. In a moment that no one could have predicted, an aide handed the committee chair a slip of paper. He read it, face pale. "I've just been informed the Inspector General has opened a preliminary inquiry into the fund allocations mentioned in this hearing." Silence, then murmurs, then shock. Caroline didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just sat back down, eyes forward, calm as stone. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett looked away for the first time. The battle was not over, but the tides had turned. The committee hearing room, once a place of predictable political performance, had turned into something else entirely, a battlefield. No one looked at their phones now. Every eye was locked on the two women sitting across from each other, Jasmine Crockett and Caroline Leavitt. Outside, the steps of the Capitol had filled with people. Some held signs that read "Accountability now" and "Justice for our classrooms." Others simply watched on screens, mouths open, hearts racing. The nation wasn't just observing anymore. It was leaning in. Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to conflict. She had built her career on bold speeches and fiery defenses of the underrepresented. But this moment was different. Her usual rhythm had been interrupted by data, by logic, by someone she had underestimated. Caroline Leavitt sat with her arms folded, expression unreadable, the picture of control. But under that calm surface, her mind was racing. She had drawn blood, but she knew the real fight was just beginning. "Miss Leavitt," Crockett said at last, her voice lower now but sharper, "you present your case like it's bulletproof. But what you're doing is dangerous." Caroline didn't react. Truth usually is. "You're accusing members of this body of corruption in live television. You could be sued. You could be silenced." Caroline looked directly at her. "I'd rather be sued for telling the truth than applauded for keeping quiet." Gasps echoed across the room again. The chair raised his gavel, but didn't strike it. Even he knew order couldn't be forced here. Then, the twist no one expected. A man from the Department of Education, a mid-level official sitting quietly in the second, roasted up. "Mr. Chairman, may I address the committee?" The chair hesitated. "This isn't standard protocol." But the official stepped forward. Anyway, producing a slim folder. His voice shook, but only slightly. "I've reviewed the documents presented by Miss Leavitt. I can confirm that the discrepancies she mentioned align with data we've flagged for internal review over the last 6 months. The room broke into stunned silence. Crockett's eyes narrowed. "Why haven't we seen that report?" "Was buried," the official said simply. Someone didn't want it seen. Now the whispers became waves. Phones rang in coat pockets. News anchors interrupted commercials. Caroline stood slowly, pushing her chair back. This hearing was supposed to be about education reform, but maybe the first reform we need is inside this room. Jasmine Crockett rose, her tone now urgent. "Don't stand there pretending to be some savior. You're part of the machine, too." Caroline didn't back down. "Then why does it sound like the machine's afraid of me?" In the press section, a journalist whispered into her, "Recorder, this isn't a hearing, it's history." Suddenly, the doors burst open. An aide rushed in, papers in hand. "Breaking Department of Justice is issuing subpoenas based on today's testimony." Now, the room erupted. Not just in murmurs, but in movement. Members of Congress conferred in hushed panic. Lawyers whispered to their clients. Reporters began sprinting toward their vans. Caroline remained still, eyes locked on Crockett. "You called me Barbie at the podium," she said, voice quiet but firm. "You thought I was a decoration, a distraction." Crockett opened her mouth, but Caroline cut her off. "But I came prepared." And now this room is no longer about ego. It's about accountability. Outside, the crowd began chanting. Not just slogans, but Caroline's name. Inside, Crockett sat down slowly, her face unreadable, her hands clenched. The chair rattled, leaned into the microphone. "This hearing is adjourned until further notice." The sound of his gavel struck. Like thunder, but it came too late. The hearing was already over. The real story had begun. Caroline walked out of the room, not with a smirk, but with quiet certainty. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions. She didn't answer. Not yet. In a black sedan waiting at the curb, her advisor handed her a phone. "The White House just called. They want you on the Sunday shows." Caroline took the phone but didn't respond right away. Because in that moment, mid the flash of cameras and roar of a divided country, she knew this was bigger than any interview. She hadn't just responded to an insult. She had lit a match in a room full of dry paper. And the fire was only beginning. The morning after the hearing, Washington, D.C. felt like a city on edge. News tickers blazed with bold letters, subpoenas issued after explosive Capitol testimony. Cable news anchors replayed the same clip again and again. Jasmine Crockett, leaning into the mic, muttering Barbie at the podium. Followed by Carolyn Leavitt's ice-cold comeback and the sudden confirmation of budget fraud. By dawn, it wasn't just a story. It was a political earthquake. Caroline Leavitt stood in the green room of a major news network, waiting for her live appearance on Sunday morning headlines. Her phone buzzed constantly. Missed calls, texts, emails, everyone wanted a piece of her. She had exposed a sleeping scandal in plain daylight. Now the storm she unleashed was sweeping through Washington. Her advisor stood nearby, whispering, "You've got 5 minutes. Just remember, keep your tone calm. Presidential." Caroline barely nodded. She stared at the monitor in front of her. It was showing Crockett on another network, speaking in a studio across town. "She's spinning the story," the advisor added. "Trying to paint you as reckless. She says you're using weaponized data and calling it truth." Caroline's eyes didn't leave the screen. She's scared. The producer gave a countdown. 3, 2, 1. And just like that, she was live again, this time not inside a government hearing, but in front of millions of Americans. The host, a veteran journalist known for tearing politicians apart, opened quickly. "Miss Leavitt, you've stunned the nation this week. Some are calling you a whistleblower. Others say you're a provocateur exploiting numbers for headlines. A witch. Are you?" Caroline smiled gently, her voice calm but charged. "I'm someone who read the reports no one wanted to read. I didn't go to that hearing to start a fire. I went because I believe our kids deserve better than leaking classrooms and vanished budgets. The host leaned in. Congresswoman, Crockett says you disrespected the hearing process. She says you performed. Caroline paused. Standing up for the truth is performance, then maybe more people in Washington should take the stage. The host blinked, surprised. Behind the cameras, staffers exchanged glances. Social media exploded with quotes from her answer within seconds, but the real surprise was still to come. Just as the segment was wrapping up, the host got a message. In his earpiece, his face shifted. "We're just getting word," he said quickly. "The DOJ has confirmed that one of the contractors tied to the missing education funds has been indicted overnight." He paused. "That's huge." Caroline didn't even flinch. "It's a start." The cameras zoomed in on her face, calm, controlled. But behind her eyes was something sharper sense of inevitability. Outside the studio, protesters had gathered. Some held up signs in support of Crockett. Others waved photos of Caroline with slogans like "Truth isn't Barbie." Police were on standby. News helicopters hovered overhead. Meanwhile, inside Capitol offices, politicians scrambled. Committee members from both parties issued public statements. Some distanced themselves from Crockett's remark. Others blamed Leavitt for the political fallout. But no one was untouched. At a hastily called press conference, Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, flanked by her team. "This isn't about a nickname," she said, her voice tense. "It's about the misuse of data. It's about undermining institutions." A reporter shot back. "Is it true your staff tried to block the audit request last spring?" Crockett's face stiffened. No comment. The damage was spreading fast. That night, Caroline returned to her apartment and stood by the window, looking out at the Capitol dome. She wasn't celebrating. There was no champagne, no party. Instead, she read through more reports, notes, and transcripts. Her advisor called. "You've been invited to a private meeting at the White House. Monday morning, they want to talk education reform." Caroline didn't answer right away. After a moment, she said, "Set it up. But tell them I'm bringing my own documents." The advisor laughed softly. "You're not letting this go, are you?" "No," she said. "This isn't over. Not even close." Down below, in the shadow of government buildings, the city buzzed with tension. Everyone was waiting, wondering whether this young woman, once dismissed as Barbie with a podium, had just started a movement. And far beyond D.C., in living rooms across the country, people watched the reruns. Some saw her as arrogant, others as brilliant. But nearly all of them agreed on one thing. They'd never look at Carolyn Leavitt the same way again. And in the silence of that Sunday night, as the city caught its breath, one truth remained spoken without words. The system had been challenged, and the reckoning had only just begun.